Hi, guys, and welcome to Kids Rock. I'm glad you are joining us for another lesson. Try to remember back a long time ago in Kids Rock when we learned about Abraham. We learned how God chose Abraham. Abraham wasn't necessarily a follower of God. God chose Abraham and made a promise to Abraham. God promised Abraham that he would be the father of many nations and that his descendants would be as numerous as the stars in the sky or the sand on the beach. And we know that that promise came true and that those descendants are the Israelites. And God promised that through Abraham, his family would bless the entire world. Now, we know that that is because Jesus was eventually born into Abraham's family, and Jesus died on the cross for our sins and rose again so we could be friends with him forever and live forever with him in heaven. We know that that is the giant rescue plan that we learn about in Scripture. So that was way back with Abraham. But we also know that in the midst of that, between Abraham, between Jesus coming as the Messiah, we know that the Israelites sinned a lot. They would follow God and then turn away and sin, and then God would punish them, and then they would turn back to God, and then they would sin, and it was like this continuous cycle. So we know that they were sinning a lot, and eventually God disciplined them by exiling them to Babylon. Exiling means that you have to leave your home. So they had to leave their home in Jerusalem, and they lived in Babylon for 70 years. And God promised that after 70 years, they would be able to return home. So that's just what we've recently learned. The Israelites did return home after those 70 years, and amazingly, they followed God for a little bit as they began to rebuild the temple. And we recently learned about Haggai and Zechariah as they encouraged the Israelites in rebuilding the temple. So that's kind of where we are today. So most of the Israelites left Babylon and went back to Jerusalem. Now, Babylon, it was in a nation in the world or an empire in the world called Persia. Not all the Israelites went back to Jerusalem. Some actually remained in Persia, and they lived among people that were not followers of God. And that started to become very difficult for them. So that is where our story picks up today.
King Ahasuerus was the king of Persia. Many years earlier, when Cyrus was king, he sent some of God's people back to Judah to rebuild the temple in Jerusalem. Some of God's people stayed in Persia. God's people were called Jews because they were from Judah. The king of Persia chose Esther to be his queen. Esther didn't tell the king that she was a Jew. One day, Mordecai heard that Haman, an important leader who worked for the king, was planning to kill all the Jews. Mordecai was upset. He was a Jew. He didn't want all the people he loved to be killed. Mordecai and all the Jews cried. Esther didn't know what was wrong. She sent a messenger to ask Mordecai why all the Jews were upset. Mordecai told Esther about Haman's evil plan. "You have to do something," Mordecai said. "Ask the king to stop Haman. Ask him to save the Jewish people." Esther sent a message back to Mordecai. "No one can approach the king unless the king calls for that person first," Esther said. "The punishment is death. Unless the king holds out his scepter, then you may live." "You're a Jew," Mordecai said. "If you don't stop Haman, he will kill you too. Maybe this is why you are the queen. Maybe God put Esther in the palace to save her people." Esther asked Mordecai and the Jews to fast for 3 days. Then Esther would go to the king, even if it meant she might die. On the 3rd day, Esther went to the king. He saw Esther and held out his golden scepter. "What is it, Queen Esther?" the king asked. "What do you want to ask me? I'll give you anything, up to half of my kingdom." Esther said, "Would you and Haman come to a feast today?" So Haman and the king went to Esther's feast. After eating, the king said, "What do you want, Queen Esther? I'll give you anything, up to half of my kingdom." "Come to my feast tomorrow," Esther said. The king agreed. The next day, Haman and the king went to Esther's feast. After eating, the king said, "What do you want, Queen Esther? I'll give you anything, up to half my kingdom." Esther spoke up. "There is a plan to kill me and my people." The king replied, "Who is responsible for this plan?" "This evil enemy, Haman," Esther said. The king was angry. He punished Haman and made a law to keep the Jewish people safe from their enemies. God was in control over Haman's evil plan to destroy the Jews. Like Haman, Satan wants to ruin God's plan and destroy believers. Satan thought he had won when Jesus died on the cross, but God raised Jesus from the dead and defeated Satan once and for all. All who believe in Jesus are rescued from sin and death.
I think we often think of being a queen as an opportunity to, or even a king, as an opportunity to be rich and powerful and to wear fancy clothes and eat the best food and get to be in charge of people. But this would not have been the case for Esther. Esther did not ask to be queen. She was chosen. So when she was chosen by the king to be a queen, really just based on her beauty, she had to leave her family, everything that was familiar to her, and live in the palace with people that she didn't know. And it wasn't like maybe your mom and dad are married and they spend time together. The king was married to her, but he didn't spend time with her necessarily. So it wasn't like a marriage like we think of. She was really just someone that was living in the palace because the king thought she was beautiful. So it was probably a very lonely life. And Esther didn't ask for that. Her life probably would have been a lot easier if the king had not chosen her. But God had a plan for Esther's life, a plan for her to protect his people. The Jews needed someone to speak up for them. When Haman, the bad guy in the video, when he made that plan to kill all of the Jews, Esther was the only one that was in a position to speak up for the Israelites. If it wasn't for Esther, they probably all would have been killed. So God was demonstrating that even in the midst of a bad situation, he has a plan and he can use people to carry out that plan. So even though Esther knew that speaking up could mean her death, she was willing to do whatever it took in order to protect God's people. Esther showed great faith in God. That would have been very scary if your life depended on someone that you hardly knew saying, "Yeah, it's okay, you can ask me a question, I'll let you live." Like that's a very scary prospect of 50-50. Maybe he'll want to talk to me or maybe he won't. And if he doesn't want to talk to me, he can just kill me. That's very scary. But Esther trusted God. She had faith in God that he was going to be able to use her to save his people. So Esther probably felt very scared and very unsure of being queen, but God definitely had a plan for her life. Esther was put in a hard situation, but she had faith in God and she trusted him even when she didn't know his plan. So I think that is a good lesson for us to learn. in the midst of all the uncertainty in this world, we can know that it's not a surprise to God. And you're going to see a video about that here in just a second. But we can know that even when things happening around us are confusing and we don't understand them, we can know that it's not a surprise to God. Now, it doesn't mean that God is happy about hard things happening to us or happening in our world, but the reality is that our world is sinful. When Adam and Eve sinned long time ago, way at the beginning of the Bible in Genesis, that ruined everything. And people continue to sin, and that sin means that our world is not perfect. So God still gives us the freedom to choose to follow him, but it doesn't mean that our life will be perfect. It doesn't mean that our world will be perfect. And Esther experienced that. So God sent Esther as a rescuer for the Jews. She was an advocate for them. She spoke up for them when they couldn't speak up for themselves. Now, obviously, later on in the Bible, God sent a greater rescuer, and that was Jesus. So Esther was able to save a number of Israelites or a number of Jewish people for that time. But when Jesus came, when he died on the cross for our sin, he made it possible that everyone in the whole world that ever lived could be rescued forever and spend eternity with him. So the story of Esther is just like a little tiny picture of what Jesus has done for all people that have lived throughout time. So I want us to learn the big picture question that we'll have for the next few weeks, and it's pretty simple, but it's such a good reminder in the uncertain times that we live in. So the big picture question is, who is in control of everything? And I know you guys know the answer to this. Sometimes it's hard to understand or believe, but who is in control of everything? God is in control of everything in heaven and on earth. And that's super important because I think sometimes we think God is in heaven, he's far away, maybe he's not so involved in what's happening here on earth, but he knows everything that happens here, and he is in charge of everything in heaven. So who is in control of everything? God is in control of everything in heaven and on earth. And I hope that is such a great encouragement to you. It's always encouraging to me when I'm going through hard times to remember that whatever I'm going through is not a surprise to God, that he knew it was going to happen, and he can use whatever it is that I'm going through for my good, to make me closer to him and to glorify him. Good can always come out of a hard situation. And we've learned that with Esther, and I think we'll continue to learn that as we continue to learn stories throughout the Bible.
Hey there, I'm Pastor Brian, and it's time for Questions from Kids. Braden from Pierre, South Dakota asks,
is God involved in everything, or do things just happen by chance?
Braden, let me give you the big answer to that and then maybe drill down and try to explain a little bit more. The answer is this: God is involved in everything. God is sovereign. That's the fancy theology word for it. That means he's in control of everything and he works providentially. There's another big theology word for you. That means that he's involved in everything to bring about what he wants to bring about. So nothing happens without him knowing about it. Nothing happens outside of his control. You know, you see that in today's story, don't you? The story of Esther. If you read through the entire book of Esther, and you can do that in one sitting, it's not really long, just read through it and just notice how many times it seems like things just happen by chance. You know, somebody happened to be in the right place at the right time. Something good just happened. No, it didn't just happen. It didn't happen by chance. Esther shows us that God was involved. He was bringing the situation to pass so that Esther could step in and save God's people. God was behind the scenes doing all that. That's one of the big takeaways of Esther. The Bible is full of that. You look at the stories of the Bible, and over again, we see that God is in control. The prophecies we've been seeing about the coming of the Messiah in the Old Testament prophecies, those are evidence that God was orchestrating. He was bringing these things to pass. So everything in our lives is under His control. Now you may ask, well, then why do bad things happen? And that is simply because we live in a broken, fallen world, and God still gives us the freedom to choose to do things, and many times we choose to do what's wrong. He's in control of that, but we choose to do what's wrong. It's a tension there. It's a mystery how those things work together, but it's what the Bible teaches. It's what we have to understand, and we just have to live that out. Understanding I am responsible for choosing to obey Him, and then God is in control. Nothing happens outside of His awareness and His authority. So find comfort in that, but at the same time, be encouraged to seek to obey God and to use the freedom He's given you for His glory. So here's a question back for you. How can understanding God's involvement in everything change how you think about or react to things that happen?
To think about the goodness of the Lord. He gives me everything I need and so much more. So I just want to lift my hands and say that I love Him. I just want to lift my heart in praise. And I want to be thankful. I want to be grateful. I want to remember everything that the Lord has done. I want to be thankful. I want to be grateful. I want to be. I want to be. I want to be. I like to think about the goodness of the Lord. He gives me everything I need and so much more.